A faint signal pierced through the stillness of the deep void, a distress call unlike anything anyone had heard in years. The message, crackling with interference, echoed across the galactic communication channels, catching the attention of the nearest fleet. The message was brief, desperate, and disjointed. Please, help. Earth, colony, danger. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving behind nothing but static. Captain Area Denton, commanding the Vanguard, the flagship of the 5th Galactic Fleet, stared at the screen, brow furrowed. She had been in the service long enough to recognize the weight of distress calls, but this one felt different. It was not the usual cry for help from a distant outpost or a random merchant ship in distress. This was something deeper, something urgent, and it carried a name that struck a chord in her heart. Earth. Earth, the cradle of humanity, had long been thought of as a backwater world, forgotten by most of the galaxy after its fall to the alien invaders centuries ago. Its colonies had been abandoned, its legacy reduced to myth. No one had heard from them in decades, if not longer. But this call came from one of those old colonies. Earth, Captain Denton muttered under her breath, her voice barely a whisper. She looked around the command deck of the Vanguard, where her officers were just as confused. Lieutenant Commander Niall stood near the navigation console, his face ashen. "Captain, you're not suggesting we respond to this, are you? It could be a trap." Arya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she ran her fingers over the edge of the console, her mind racing. The galaxy had been at peace for years. Sure, there were skirmishes here and there, but nothing to warrant a fleet like theirs. They were meant to patrol, to protect the outer colonies, but this was something else. The signal came from the edge of the galaxy, where Earth's last known colonies had existed. It was a dead zone, a place that had been erased from galactic charts after Earth's fall. No one had any reason to believe anyone was left there, but someone had sent the call. Arya's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of her communications officer, Ensign Kai. "Captain, there's more." The signal came from Colony X-13. It was one of the first Earth colonies established during the early expansion, and it went dark over 50 years ago. No records, no transmissions, no anything. It was supposed to be abandoned. "Until now," Arya replied, her eyes narrowing as she turned to face her officers. "Get the fleet ready to move. We're answering that call." There were murmurs of disbelief among the crew, but none of them questioned her decision. Not yet. The Vanguard was the fastest ship in the fleet, and its weapons were the most advanced. But the further they ventured into the unknown, the more unsettled the crew became. They were heading to a place that hadn't been touched in generations, and a part of Arya wondered if they were about to stir something that should have remained undisturbed. As the fleet moved into hyperspace, Arya couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. There was something wrong about this situation, something her years of experience couldn't quite place. She had been a commander long enough to know that instinct was a valuable tool, and right now, it was screaming at her to be cautious. The further they traveled, the more she felt the weight of the galaxy pressing in. They were nearing the fringe of known space, a barren stretch where only the bravest, or the most foolish, dared to venture. Arya had read the old reports of Earth's struggles, of the alien wars that had nearly wiped out humanity. She knew the stories, and yet, hearing that name, Earth, now, in this context, felt strange. It felt like an echo from the past, one that refused to stay buried. The days passed slowly as they traveled. The crew grew restless, and Arya found herself alone more often than not, lost in thought. She couldn't explain it, but she began to feel like they were being watched. At first, she thought it was just the tension of the mission, the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But it wasn't just that. It was a cold feeling, one that crept into her bones, making her doubt every decision she had ever made. The call had been brief, but it had been enough to pull them this far. And now, they were about to arrive at a place long abandoned. Colony X-13 was just a dot on the map now, a forgotten outpost in a dead zone. But Arya knew better than to take it lightly. There was something here, something that had drawn her crew to this forsaken corner of the galaxy. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates." Lieutenant Commander Niall's voice crackled through the comm system, pulling Arya from her thoughts. She straightened, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the console. "Bring us out of hyperspace." The ship lurched as they transitioned back into real space, and the stars around them shifted, revealing a dark, desolate planet in the distance. It was an odd sight, a dead world, with a broken, incomplete ring of satellites orbiting it. The planet's surface was marked by craters and scars, and it appeared to be mostly barren, with little sign of life. "Is this Colony X-13?" Arya asked, her voice sharp. "Yes, Captain," Niall confirmed, his voice filled with hesitation. "This is the place. But there's no sign of activity. No ships, no transmissions, nothing." Arya's eyes scanned the planet, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected something like this, but seeing it in person made it all the more real. There was no life here, no sign of civilization. Yet the call had come from this very place. "Send out a recon team," she ordered. "I want answers." As the team prepared to leave, Arya stood by the window, staring at the lifeless planet below. The feeling that something was wrong intensified, but she couldn't place why. It was as if the planet itself was hiding something, something ancient and dangerous. As the recon team descended to the surface, the tension on the Vanguard grew. Arya watched the countdown on the screen, her mind racing with thoughts of what they might find. But deep down, she knew that whatever awaited them, it was far worse than they could imagine. The team's signal cut off unexpectedly, leaving the Vanguard in an eerie silence. Arya's heart skipped a beat. What happened? Where's their feed? "Captain, we're not receiving anything," Ensign Kai reported, his voice tight with anxiety. "It's like their signal was wiped out." Arya turned sharply, her eyes filled with determination. "Prepare the fleet. We're going down there." As she stepped onto the transporter pad, the gravity of the situation hit her all at once. They weren't just answering a distress call. They were stepping into something much darker. The past was coming back to haunt them. And Arya knew that once they landed, there would be no turning back. The galaxy wasn't ready for what they were about to face. Neither was she. This opening sets the stage for an intense and mysterious journey, with Arya and her crew on a path that leads them into unknown and potentially deadly territory. The suspense builds as the crew's doubts grow, and the mysterious distress call pulls them deeper into a web of danger. The first part leaves the audience wondering what lies ahead and whether the team will survive what is to come. The Vanguard moved silently through space, its engines humming steadily as it closed in on the coordinates of Colony X-13. Captain Arya Denton couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't the unease of an ordinary mission. It was something deeper. The faint distress call had triggered something buried in her mind, something she couldn't quite place. She found herself glancing at the view screen every few moments, staring out at the endless black, as though the void might hold answers. But there was nothing, only stars. Lieutenant Commander Niall, standing beside her at the command deck, spoke up, breaking the silence that had hung over them for hours. "Captain, do we have any information on what kind of forces might be out there? Anything in the vicinity?" Arya shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the vast expanse of space. "Nothing, Commander. That's the problem. This is a dead zone. The signal came from a world that's been abandoned for decades, long before any of us were born. There's no record of any hostile activity in the area. It doesn't make sense." Niall nodded, though his expression remained uneasy. "It's not like a routine distress call. I've been through the files. The Earth colonies weren't just abandoned. They were wiped off the maps, erased completely. Something's off about this." Arya knew he was right, but she didn't want to admit it. The Earth colonies had been a symbol of hope, of expansion. But after the war with the alien Zoran Empire, those colonies had disappeared without a trace, as if they had never existed. Now, a faint signal from one of them had stirred the sleeping galaxy. "Can you pull up any more information on Colony X-13, Ensign?" Arya asked, turning toward her communications officer, Ensign Kai. Kay's hands moved swiftly over the console, his fingers tapping the keys. "I'm running the data now, Captain." The colony was one of the oldest Earth settlements, established over a century ago. After the Zoran War, they lost contact with Earth. No updates, no transmissions. The place went dark. All records were erased. Erased. Arya's voice was tight. "What do you mean erased?" Kai hesitated before responding. "I mean that after the war, Earth tried to cover up any trace of the colonies. Anything that could have been a threat to the newly formed galactic alliances was wiped. Information about Earth's history was sealed, and the galaxy just moved on." Arya clenched her fists, a flash of anger rising within her. The idea that something so significant had been erased from history, that Earth, her home, had been erased, was deeply unsettling. And now, we're being called to this forgotten world. "Exactly," Kai said, looking up from the console. "The distress call is only the beginning. Whatever's out there, whatever's left of Colony X-13, we're going to have to face it soon." The Vanguard's engines hummed louder as the ship began to decelerate. The crew gathered at their stations, and Arya could feel the tension mounting. The unknown always brought fear with it, and this was no different. What was waiting for them down there? The planet below seemed to mock their uncertainty, its barren surface shining eerily under the light of distant stars. There were no signs of life, no signals, not even any remnants of infrastructure. Just the cold, lifeless planet that had been forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. "Captain, we're approaching the planet's atmosphere," Niall said, his voice crackling through the ship's communication system. "Ready the recon team." "I want boots on the ground within the hour," Arya ordered, her voice firm. She didn't want to hesitate any longer. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. The mystery of Colony X-13 had to be solved, no matter the cost. Minutes later, the team assembled in the transport bay. Arya stood with her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Niall, and a handful of soldiers, each of them equipped with the latest armor and weapons. Their faces were all grim, and Arya knew they were all thinking the same thing. What if they didn't return? The transport ship lowered to the planet's surface, a steady whine filling the air as the engines powered down. As the hatch opened, a cold wind greeted them, the chill of the barren planet seeping into their bones. The planet's surface was rocky and desolate, the sky overcast and thick with clouds. The team stepped onto the ground, their boots crunching against the dry soil. Arya glanced at Niall, and he gave her a tight nod. They weren't sure what they were walking into, but there was no going back now. "Stay sharp," Arya commanded, her voice cold and steady. "This place could be more dangerous than we think." The team spread out, carefully navigating the rocky terrain as they moved toward what appeared to be the remains of a settlement in the distance. The structures were half collapsed, the ruins scattered across the barren land like forgotten memories. There were no signs of life, no movement, just emptiness. "Looks like they didn't leave much behind," Niall remarked, his voice carrying the weight of his unease. "This place has been abandoned for a long time." But Arya's instincts told her something was wrong. As they neared the ruins, a faint noise reached their ears, a low hum, barely perceptible, like the whisper of the wind. She motioned for the team to stop and listen. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The team nodded, their eyes darting around. The sound seemed to be coming from the heart of the ruins, a deep, pulsating hum that felt wrong. "Stay close," Arya ordered, "and be ready for anything." They continued forward, each step heavier than the last. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air, as though the very ground beneath them was alive. As they reached the heart of the ruins, they found a massive structure half buried in the dirt. It looked like an old communications tower, its top broken off, but its base still standing, a silent sentinel to the past. Arya approached it cautiously, her hand resting on the side of the tower. The hum was deafening now, and she could feel it pulsing beneath her fingertips. "Captain," Niall called out suddenly, his voice filled with dread. "Look at this." He pointed to something on the ground, a series of strange, glowing symbols carved into the dirt, like an ancient warning. The markings were unlike anything Arya had seen before, an alien language that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Arya's heart skipped a beat. What in the galaxy is this? Before Niall could answer, a sudden harsh crackle erupted from their comm system, and a voice rang out through the speakers, sending a chill down Arya's spine. It was the same voice from the distress call. The message, though broken and distorted, was unmistakable. "They're coming. They're coming back." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that hung heavily in the air. Arya's gaze shot to Niall, her face pale. "We need to get back to the ship. Now." But as they turned to head back, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and a deep guttural sound echoed from somewhere beneath the planet's surface. Something was waking up, and it wasn't friendly. This second part builds on the mysterious elements introduced in the first part and increases the suspense with the discovery of strange markings, a ghostly transmission, and the sudden tremors beneath the planet's surface. The crew is now deeper into the unknown, with a sense of danger creeping closer by the minute. The ground trembled beneath their boots, a low rumble that seemed to grow louder with each passing second. The air was thick with tension as Arya and her team slowly made their way back toward the transport ship. Every step they took seemed to echo in the eerie silence that surrounded them, as though the very planet itself was holding its breath. The strange markings they had discovered, glowing faintly beneath the dust, weighed heavily on her mind. What had they stumbled upon? And more importantly, what did that transmission mean? "They're coming. They're coming back." The words echoed in her mind, sending a chill down her spine. Whoever, or whatever, had sent that distress signal had been terrified. And now, they were on the brink of something far greater than a simple abandoned colony. "Captain," Niall's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone urgent. "We need to hurry. The tremors are getting stronger. Something's underground. I don't like this." Arya glanced up at him, her expression hardening. "I know. I can feel it too. Let's move." The team quickened their pace, their weapons raised, eyes scanning the barren landscape for any sign of movement. The hum in the air had grown louder, almost a low, vibrating thrum that seemed to pulse in time with the tremors. Arya felt the vibrations deep in her bones. She had never experienced anything like this. There was something ancient, something powerful beneath their feet, and it was waking up. As they approached the transport ship, the ground shook again, this time with more force. Arya stumbled, catching herself on the side of the ship. The tremors were no longer subtle. They were violent, enough to send a shiver of panic through her. The ship's engines hummed to life, and the hatch slowly began to close, but Arya held up a hand, signaling for everyone to stop. "We're not leaving yet," she said, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. Something told her that they couldn't just turn their backs on this. Whatever was happening here was too important. "We need to find out what's causing these tremors. It's not natural." Niall gave her a sharp look but nodded. "You're right, but we're not equipped for a full-scale excavation. If there's something underground, we don't have the resources to deal with it." "We'll make do," Arya replied. "We have to try. This isn't just about a missing colony anymore. It's about something bigger." The team, though visibly uneasy, followed her lead. They began scanning the area with portable seismic equipment, trying to pinpoint the source of the tremors. It didn't take long before Ensign Kai, who had been working furiously at his station, called out, "Captain, I'm picking up something. It's coming from beneath us, right under this area. It's massive, like a ship or a structure. I can't get an exact reading, but whatever it is, it's huge." Aria's heart skipped a beat. Could it be the source of the distress call? It's possible, Kai replied, his voice strained. But there's something else. It's moving. Whatever it is, it's active. And it's not alone. The words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. Aria felt a knot form in her stomach. What had they awakened? She turned to Niall. Gather the team. We're going in. The soldiers hesitated, glancing at one another nervously, but they didn't question her. With grim resolve, they began moving toward the epicenter of the tremors, where the readings were strongest. The planet's surface felt cold, like a corpse that hadn't been disturbed in centuries, but the deep rumblings coming from beneath them spoke of something far from dead. They moved in silence, their footsteps crunching against the dry ground. The strange markings that had been etched into the soil earlier seemed to pulse in the low light, as though they were alive, glowing faintly. Aria's pulse quickened as they neared a large crack in the ground, a jagged rift that had formed in the earth. It was wide enough for them to see down into the darkness below, but not wide enough for them to see what lay within. Captain, we should proceed with caution, Niall advised, his voice tight. This could be some sort of ancient trap. Aria nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. What if this was a weapon, or some kind of alien technology? What if this was what had wiped out the colony so long ago? Stay alert, Aria said. We need to find the source of that signal. Now. They made their way carefully to the edge of the rift, peering into the darkness. The air around them was thick, almost oppressive, and the humming sound seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. Aria's fingers tightened around her weapon. There was something down there, something powerful. As they descended into the rift, the walls around them seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The markings from earlier, glowing faintly, were now visible in greater detail, running in intricate patterns along the rock walls. They had been etched there long ago, perhaps by the original colonists, or maybe by something else entirely. Whatever had left them behind, it had wanted to make sure this place remained hidden. The deeper they went, the stronger the vibrations became, until they were almost unbearable. Every step felt like a small earthquake, shaking them to their core. Aria felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as a sudden thought crossed her mind. What if this is a trap? She whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. What if they wanted us to come here? The thought was chilling, but there was no time to dwell on it. The team pressed forward, determined to uncover the truth, no matter what the cost. At the heart of the rift, they found a large, circular chamber. The walls were lined with more of the glowing symbols, and in the center of the room stood a massive object, almost like a door, but not quite. It was made of an unfamiliar metal, slick and smooth, and it seemed to hum with energy, as though it was alive. The closer they got, the more Aria could feel it, the weight of something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. Captain, this is it, Niall said, his voice low. This is what's been causing the tremors. Aria nodded slowly, her mind racing. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the surface of the strange door-like object. The moment her skin made contact, the hum intensified, vibrating through her entire body. She pulled her hand back sharply, startled, and the ground trembled violently once again. Suddenly, a harsh guttural voice rang out from the darkness, echoing off the walls of the chamber. You should not have come. The voice was low, alien, and full of menace. Aria's heart skipped a beat. Who are you? She demanded, her voice steady, though her mind was reeling. The answer came not in words, but in the overwhelming feeling of something ancient and powerful awakening in the depths of the planet. The ground trembled harder now, as though the very planet itself was alive. The object in front of them began to glow brighter, its surface shifting and rippling as though it was coming to life. Run, Niall shouted, grabbing Aria's arm. But it was too late. The planet had already begun to fight back. This third part of the story deepens the mystery with the discovery of a massive alien structure beneath the planet's surface. The crew is now faced with an ancient, powerful force, and the stakes are higher than ever. The tension and suspense continue to build as they begin to understand the true scale of the danger they are in. The team sprinted back to the rift's edge, but the ground beneath them shook violently. Arya could feel her heart racing as the tremors intensified, the ground cracking open in new, unpredictable directions. The air was thick with a palpable energy, and a low, mechanical hum filled the space, reverberating through her bones. She stumbled as the surface beneath her feet cracked, threatening to swallow them whole. "Captain," Niall's voice cut through the chaos, filled with panic. "We need to leave, now." Arya turned to face him, her eyes wide with both fear and determination. She could hear the urgency in his voice, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the glowing structure in the depths below. The surface of the massive object was now rippling like water, pulsing with strange energy. It seemed to be reacting to their presence, coming alive in a way that defied all logic. "We can't leave," Arya said through gritted teeth, her voice hoarse. "We don't know what this is, but whatever it is, we need to understand it before it destroys us." The team was hesitant, glancing nervously at the gaping chasm beneath them, but they trusted Arya. They had seen her face down enemies and make impossible decisions before. But this was different. As they took another cautious step back from the edge, the ground rumbled again. But this time the tremors were joined by a sharp, crackling sound, like the earth itself was splitting open. A beam of light shot up from the structure below, a brilliant white light that cast eerie shadows across the rift. The sound of metal screeching, of something large moving beneath the surface, made the hair on the back of Arya's neck stand on end. Suddenly, the light died down, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Arya held her breath. The silence was almost worse than the noise. It felt like the planet was waiting, as if holding its breath, preparing for something far worse. Her eyes darted around the darkened chamber, her pulse pounding in her ears. Something was coming. She could feel it in the air. The tension was thick enough to taste. And then, without warning, the ground cracked open. A roar, deep and guttural, echoed from the depths below, so loud it made the entire planet shudder. The ground beneath their feet trembled once again as something massive began to rise from the rift. The air became impossibly hot, thick with a metallic scent. Arya's heart raced, and she instinctively raised her weapon, ready for whatever was coming. The dark shape slowly emerged, its outline barely visible at first. It was enormous, towering over them like a shadow of destruction, its surface shifting and rippling, as though it were made of liquid metal. It rose higher and higher, until it seemed to fill the entire sky. "Everyone, take cover," Arya shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the roaring noise that surrounded them. The ship, or whatever it was, had finally emerged fully, revealing itself in all its terrifying glory. It looked ancient, older than anything Arya had ever seen. Its shape was like nothing they had encountered before, something between a ship and a living creature. The alien craft was covered in intricate symbols that glowed faintly in the dark, pulsing with an ominous energy. "Arya, what the hell is that?" Niall shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar. Arya stood up from her seat, feeling the urgency rise within her. She needed to get to the command center. The fate of everyone aboard the fleet depended on what they did next. "Get us in," she ordered, her voice hard, cutting through the tension in the air. "We don't have much time." The pilot nodded, maneuvering the transport ship towards the flagship. As they drew closer, the comms crackled to life, the voice of the fleet commander breaking through the static. "Arya, report in. We received your distress call. What's going on down there?" Arya took a deep breath, her mind racing as she prepared to explain the unexplainable. "Commander, you need to listen carefully. We've encountered something we don't fully understand, but it's dangerous. The rift, it's not just a geological anomaly. There's a ship down there, an ancient one, and it's awake. The pause on the other end of the line felt like an eternity, the tension between the two ships palpable. Finally, the commander responded, his voice tight with disbelief. An ancient ship. Area, are you telling me you found something from the Dark Ages? I'm telling you we've awakened something that was never meant to be found. Area said, her voice unwavering. And it's coming for us. We need to prepare for battle. Now. There was another long pause, and then the commander's voice was firm, steady. Understood. We're initiating full battle readiness. Meet us at the command center. As the transport ship docked with the flagship, Arya felt the weight of the situation press down on her. She had seen many battles in her career, but this was different. The unknown ship was a force unlike anything they had ever encountered, and its arrival was just the beginning. Arya stepped off the transport and made her way to the command center, where the fleet's senior officers were already gathering. The room was filled with a tense energy as the crew hurried to coordinate their defenses. Captain Arya, the fleet commander, greeted her, his face grim. We've been monitoring the signals from the rift. What exactly did you uncover down there? Arya took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room. Every officer was listening intently, waiting for her to reveal the truth. She could feel the weight of their expectations, but she knew there was no easy answer. Whatever's down there is not from our galaxy, she said, her voice low but clear. It's ancient, and it's coming for us. It doesn't matter how much firepower we have. We're not prepared for something like this. The room fell silent at her words. The reality of what they were facing began to settle in. There was no plan, no contingency, no strategy for dealing with an enemy like this. They had always fought wars against enemies they could understand, but this was different. The question is, Arya continued, her gaze hardening, how do we stop something that was never meant to be found? The fleet commander was silent for a moment, then nodded, his voice resolute. We fight. We fight with everything we've got. Arya's heart sank. She knew that was the only option they had left, but something told her that even with the entire fleet, they would be outmatched. The ship that had emerged from the rift wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, one that could tear through the galaxy itself. I'll prepare the fleet for battle, Arya said, turning to leave the command center. We have one chance to stop this, and we need to make it count. As she exited the room, her mind raced with the possibilities of what was to come. The fleet was readying itself for a war they hadn't seen in centuries. But Arya knew this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself. And they had no idea what horrors awaited them. Back outside, the stars stretched endlessly before them, as cold and indifferent as the darkness that had once held the rift close. Arya looked up, wondering how long they would have before the ancient ship descended upon them with its terrible power. The fleet's weapon systems were being readied, but there was a deep, gnawing fear in her gut. The worst of this nightmare hadn't even begun yet, and there was no way to stop it. Not yet. Not until they understood who, or what, was behind the rift. Until they discovered the true enemy that would shake the galaxy to its core.